Alright, so I'm going to go through and just see if I can make this look a little bit nicer. I'm going to, just for grins, hide the, where am I going with this? I'm going to hide the other lights in the scene because I don't feel like they're really doing super much. And I should, so I actually have a cache for this that I made in another quick video. So if we enable that, you'll see I have some nice, like, random sim data. It's not, like, super pretty, but, you know, it's a fire. So I can kind of scrub through and, like, see if there's any frames that I just like, but I want a little more detail. I like swirly candle flames. They make me happy. Actually, that looks pretty nice as a candle flame, sort of. So I'm going to see if I can punch a little more detail into this. So I'm just going to turn off my cache and go back to frame 1, and we are going to play with some settings. So I'm going to do, what am I going to do? I'm going to go into fluid shape, output mesh. I'll pause this because it's not really doing anything. My computer is crying inside and outside. Alright, so what I'm going to do is add some turbulence into this temperature, see if that does anything. I'll poke in a little bit of noise, because right now, basically our flame is rendering with, not lighting, our flame is rendering with incandescence as temperature. So mostly I want to see if I can control temperature. And to an extent, density also has a sort of an effect on this, where you can basically sort of push your, you can, if you disperse your flame super fast, it's going to take some of that heat with it. So they do kind of relate to each other. In this case, I'm just going to see if I can do what I want to do with temperature. So I added a little bit of turbulence in here, and you can see we are getting like a little bit of nicer sort of detail and swirl in there. I'm going to set turbulence all the way up to 5, because I'm a spaz. The other thing that you should know doing sims is if you change settings in the middle of the sim, it might, if you re-sim this, it might look completely different. Actually, what happens if I set noise all the way up? I don't usually play with noise. But it's going to look completely different when you re-sim it, because it's going to start with different settings. So do also just be aware that that is a thing. And in this case, actually, I think noise is doing more what I want, which is annoying, because I always have terrible, terrible luck with noise. But I do like some turbulence in there, so I'm just going to maybe sort of like do this, and then pressure threshold I don't want. Diffusion, dissipation is actually kind of fine for now. Let's see what we got by way of, okay, I have no turbulence on that, great. Let's see if we add some noise to this. And I feel like, alright, that's kind of getting fun-ish looking, where you maybe have some of these. Okay, so this is one of those weird instances that I don't usually do very often, but I'm going to go into my emitter. I feel like I do this more for temperature than density, I think, where I'll go up and I'll set this to like 2. So I'm going to resim that. It's basically going to put out more heat with each flame, because I want to see if I can get that to sort of last a little bit longer. A lot of times we'll play with sort of dissipation settings on heat, but it's really hard if you have no heat. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that and be like, that looks awful. That's worse than what I started with. Let's start it with 3, and then go in and do, I don't really know, I'm just kind of like playing with settings in a somewhat arbitrary fashion. I used to be pretty good at setting up sims, and now I just like forget everything. It's been a while since I've actually like had to make real person sims, so I'm just like, haha, sims. Incidentally, you can use all these same temperatures. You don't need to use this for candle flames. You could use this for smoke or anything else. It's the same basic principles there. So in this case, I think part of what's happening is I just have all of my, I played very aggressively with this incandescent setting. So now that we have more heat generated, I can set this down and we get that less really absurd yellow flame. And I'm also going to play with my, play with some of these dudes. So this is going to be, I think there's a few things I don't like about this. One, you get this really hard ring around the center of the flame, and 2, everything else kind of fades into nothing really, really fast. My cat is rubbing his face on my computer. Like a weirdo. So what we can do is maybe, ooh, but not like that, that's terrible. So we can maybe take some of the opacity like in here up and use that to sort of pull out a few more details in the more diffuse part of the sim. We can also set the input bias on this back to 0 and then mess with stuff from there. So one thing I usually do actually is I'll put, I like just personally turning down the opacity like right on the densest part of the sim. I feel like for some reason that just like looks nicer to me. And I'm also, it's like still feels like a really crazy hard blob in the center, so I'm just gonna kind of maybe add a few more layers in there of opacity. I got a really nice sim the other day, and I like don't know what the heck I did for it. So it goes. You do something cool, and then you're like, I will never be able to recreate this. Great. Perhaps something like this, and then like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just sort of like playing with random settings and seeing what it does. Alright, let's move it like really... Alright, so this is one of those instances where like maybe I can't seem to really get to the part that I want. So I might play with input bias and kind of see what that gives me. And the answer to that is... Nah, it does kind of sort of do a little bit more of what I want on the inside of the stupid flame. So now let me see if I can bump some of these settings up. Probably, this is like probably gonna get rid of half my graph, and tra-la-la-la-la-la-la. Okay, that, I've decided that input bias was a bad thing to play with here. We could also set opacity to be used with temperature, pretty much any other setting, where we so inclined to do that. And in this case, so like last time I set it to density, and I thought, actually, what did I do last time? I used density, and I think I added a bunch of noise to my density. And that looked pretty nice. So let me try resimming this. Random experimentation. So like I said, I mean, depending on the look you're going for, there's like 1,000 bazillion different ways to get cool looking sims. There's no like one right size fits all kind of thing. It really is just sort of dependent on what you want. Like this, simming this apparently with noise in my density looks completely different than it did before. And this is set to temperature, so like let's set this back to density and see what that gets us. I think I usually do just sort of like this being set as density. I kind of want to experiment with temperature for some reason though. That's just, I think, not going to give me... I feel like this is going to look weird. But then again, weird looking is cool half the time. It's always hard. I can never figure out where the heck in this graph I'm actually, like, editing stuff. Like, it's so hard to pull. So, I mean, like, that looks kind of interesting. I'm still not a huge fan of it, but it is a little bit better than it was previously. So I would imagine that if we just get rid of some more stuff in here and in here, I want to, like, kill these little patches in here because I think they look awful. I'm just trying to find the stupid patches. This one. It has to... Yes. Okay, great. So apparently if I want to punch in more detail in this area here, I'm going to be working somewhere in this range. So I'm just going to come back in and add a lot of really aggressive spikes in here and see if I can get some cool little, like, swirls, punched in. Perhaps another one. And get me, like, a really high one. Winging the crap out of this sim. Yeah, so it's like okay. It's not, I'm not in love with it. I don't hate it. It just sort of is. That I do like more, actually. That looks significantly nicer once I get rid of all of that. And now we have these nice sort of like wispy things around the edge. So what if I like take this down a little bit, and then we've had this whole area in here which is like no information in it at all. So I'm going to add a little bit more opacity back into here and see what this does. So like I said, depending on, you know, if you're using density or temperature, you might need to rejigger your graphs fairly aggressively, which is frustrating, and why I also recommend saving inversions if you have something that you like, because it extremely hard to go back after you start playing with settings, since everything is so cursedly interrelated with Sims. Let's see, what is this area? Cool. So I actually like kind of like that. I think that looks interesting-ish, sort of, as a flame. And we have, I'll let this render out like a tiny bit more. You can see we have these nice little like sort of swirly details to a certain extent, like in here. And then we get a bunch of nice little sort of fuzzy things out here. I am actually probably going to get rid of like some of these very outer ones, because I think that it's like maybe just like take the opacity down a lot. I feel like it's too much banding, and I'm not super a fan of how that's looking. You also don't need to take these down to full non-opacity. I'm probably being a bit heavy-handed with that. But I'm going to call that decent for now. And let's see if we can further refine the settings for this sim. So we have density, and I think I added a bunch of noise to that. I'll add some more noise. Alright, so for the flame candle, what we can do is add some, I'm going to save this because I kind of like it. I'm going to see, poke a little bit more noise in there and see what happens. And I'm just sort of letting the sim and then picking an arbitrary frame and being like, how does it look at this frame? It's like, kind of okay. Ooh, yeah. Alright, so this is kind of what I personally like in Flame, where you get like all these like little sort of wiggly bits. And again, since I've done this just sort of randomly changing settings, I don't know exactly what got me there. It was either the noise and the turbulence, or the, I'm sorry, it was either the noise and temperature or density, because that's really the only thing I changed. But that's kind of fun. I do kind of like that. So I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to give this a little bit more swirl. Go back and resim, see if I can stop around frame 120. Excuse me. Okay, 137. We're 10 frames more in. That is not words. So this is why I like swirl, because it'll give you a lot of these like really crazy sort of like wiggly frames. In this case, the flame shape looks insane, and it's completely the wrong scale. Like, this is like something that should be a larger fire, not something on a candlestick, but I do like the shape of it. This is one of those instances where maybe like if we let it play for a few more frames, it'll sort of normalize itself. In this case, it seems to be going farther off to the side as if there's wind, which normally I like, but again is not really what I'm going for here. But I do like that. It's pretty, it's just like one weird, it's a UFO! Anyway, I don't know how I suddenly got to UFOs, but anyway. So we could play with that. We could add more noise. We could add turbulence. Let me see. I feel like what I should do is actually add a little bit more dissipation into my temperature, because I feel like part of the reason the flame is so big is it's just staying there for a long time. I always like watching the flames bloom. It's kind of fun. Alright, ooh, 127. That was... Alright, cool. So I'm going to say, like, that's pretty alright, I guess. Get a little bit more detail in there. Kind of like it. Could I mess with the opacity graph a little more? Probably. Am I going to? Hardcore. But I do kind of like that. And one interesting thing, I guess, to note about this is we have this really... one of the reasons I don't tend to like setting my temperature up really crazy high is it makes these weird, like, little dots in the center of the flame, which is kind of strange. And I think what that is, unless I'm going crazy, is literally just the heat being generated from the emitter itself. Like, you're literally seeing the moment that that heat is generated. So theoretically, if we were to set this back to 1 and then go in to... Alright, cool. and where to re-render that. The sim looks totally different because we're putting out 3 times less heat, or like a third of the heat that we previously were. But why am I rendering such a large area? This is unnecessary. But now we have a little bit more, or well, I guess a little bit less insane looking speckles on the inside, and part of this I think is right now just grain, but excuse me. So what we can do in this instance is sort of turn down some of my other settings. We could go back in and mess with the incandescence offset. Or I'm sorry, that was opacity. Why am I changing that? That's not what I wanted. This is color. What am I doing? I'm clicking on everything except what I want to click on. So we can go back and like mess with the offsets a little bit, and that will give you the sort of larger flames. It's gonna, and we have like a little bit less noise in the center, kind of, a little bit. Excuse me. I think I actually, though, kind of liked what I had before. And again, I could always go through and like modify the opacity, I just really don't want to. Excuse me. So what if I do, it still seems like the yellow is not really showing up a whole lot, if at all. I think I'm actually just going to go back to what I had before. I was kind of happy with that, apart from the grain, and frankly this is a demonstration and really doesn't matter all that much. Sometimes I get a little bit too into these as things. So, excuse me. What I'm going to do, let that sim. This is pretty much what we got. And I think I'm going to call that good for now, I guess. And you can also change the shading settings that's unrelated to your cache, so you can always go back and modify them later. So what I'm going to do now is I think go through and just, for one, make sure that my emitter is kind of centered on my wick. It seems like for some reason it's maybe not. But I could be going crazy. Who knows? Who knows? Alright, cool. So I'm just going to shift that over a tiny bit. I'm going to go in and then turn on, I'm going to do like a nice cache of this and then render it. Throw it up as a thumbnail. What am I doing? Display. Alright, so we have settings for different gravities and damping and all of this other stuff. I'll do a high detail solve. I feel like I'm going to regret this. I'm going to do a high detail solve, and I'm going to set this up to 70 and just see what happens. And I will do a cache. Where am I going? I will do an end cache with my fluid and go to frame 200 because these seem to be doing pretty decent stuff. Of course, oh no, I just saved it. Oh wait, oh. Okay, I'm gonna make a new folder for this so there's not just a bunch of random cache nonsense floating around. And go ahead and apply that. I'm gonna do replace. This is an entirely new scene. You could do add and blend, then you can sort of like take part of your one cache and blend it with part of your other cache, and it is convenient, but shrugs. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cache that, and then wait, and I'm just gonna upload this as a thumbnail because I don't think anyone wants to sit here and like watch me cache this and then like systematically render things, because it's not gonna be super inherently interesting. So, yeah.